Hi, everyone. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I'm a member of the Inspirit Advantage team. And I'm joined by two of our admissions consultants. Thank you all for attending How to Create and Stick to an MCAT Study Schedule. We're excited to kind of walk you through some tips and tricks here. Inspirit Advantage is a company that helps med school applicants apply and get into the best schools that they can that fit their needs. And we help through the whole process from just beginning to think about med school, the MCAT process, to actually applying to residencies, applying for exams within med school, or taking exams, just really every single part of the process. So today we will introduce our two panelists. We'll go over an MCAT overview. We'll talk about factors to consider when beginning to plan out your study process and schedule. We'll talk about actually creating that schedule, tips and tricks to stay on pace, and then we'll open things up for a Q&A. So as you have questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll definitely get to those at the end. We have experienced panelists here, so feel free to pick their brains. That's what we're here for today. So we have Callie and Synthia here with us. Callie, can you give us a little overview on yourself?
Yeah, hi there, everyone. I'm Callie. I'm currently a fourth-year medical student at Yale School of Medicine. I went to University of Iowa for undergrad, and I have served on the admissions committee here, as well as being an admissions consultant for Inspira.
Thanks so much for being here. Synthia, can you give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I actually just graduated from the Keck School of Medicine of USC this May. So now I'm a first-year psychiatry resident at Coya Delta in California. I graduated from UCLA, and at Keck School of Medicine, I helped with interviews by interviewing candidates, and I also am an admissions consultant for Inspira Advantage.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so we'll talk about MCAT sections, testing conditions, and then scoring. So we'll dive right into sections. Callie, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so the MCAT is broken into 4 sections, which are all weighted equally. The first one is the chemical and physical foundations. So that's 59 questions and is really covering biology, both general and organic chemistry and physics. Then there's the biological and biochemical foundations, which also has 59 questions, covering biochemistry and general chemistry, but also biology. Also incorporates some statistics in there too. And then the psychological, social, and biological foundations of behavior has 59 questions, mostly covering biology, psychology, and sociology. And the critical analysis and reasoning skills has 53 questions, which are mostly passage-based and test your critical analysis and reasoning skills. And so they can be related to topics in anything, including art, humanities, social science. It is not necessarily medicine-based per se.
All right, this slide is really just a visual breakdown of the last slide, so you can get a sense of how things are weighted, but that 25% breakdown is pretty easy to remember. We'll move on to scoring. Synthia, you want to take this one?
Sure. So the total scores range from 472 to 578, with 500 being the passing score. So you can get a maximum score of 132 in each section of the MCAT. And it's important to understand that the MCAT scores each of its 4 sections individually, and your total score is a combination of each score you receive on the 4 sections of the test.
I think a question that we get at Inspira a lot is how to get that perfect score. Do either of you have any quick tips before we move on?
I did not get a perfect score, but I know someone who did, and they used UWorld and Anki. So that's one strategy.
Yeah, there's definitely diminishing returns, getting to be closer and closer to a perfect score. And it also really depends on the kind of school you're trying to go to, what a good target range is for you. You don't need a 528 to get into med school. Although if you're looking at really competitive schools, getting over a 520 definitely is very helpful.
All right.
So yes, no matter where your MCAT scores are, they're going to be part of a percentile rank, and you're ranked against everyone else who's taking the MCAT. So, so ideally, like the percentile of your MCAT is kind of the percentile of the current class at your desired medical school. So just try to have a good idea of what you're aiming for when you set out to study to help direct and focus what you're going to be covering.
Great.
So the MCAT is a total of almost 8 hours. It's like 7.5 hours, but you don't have to take all this time because the breaks in between each section are optional. So if you just want to like speed through the test and finish as quickly as possible, you don't have to take the optional breaks. But the breakdown is here as follows. Each section you get 95 minutes, and then the optional break between each section is 10 minutes, and then you get a 30-minute lunch break about halfway through the exam.
All right, so now we'll move on to talking about some factors to consider when building your study schedule.
So there are a few different things to consider here. First is your MCAT test date. So to plan between when you plan on taking it and now, and trying to divide up what you're going to be doing between then. Ideally, you'll have you'll want to study before you schedule your test date, so you kind of have an idea of how long it's going to take you to study to get there. You might also want some more time prior to the application deadline in case you didn't score as well as you hope and need to retest. For how much time do you have to study? This is something that is different for every person. Are you someone who's in undergraduate and studying? Are you working a full-time job? Are you full-time MCAT studying? There's such a big range of the time commitments that you have. So really consider what your day-to-day looks like and how many hours you'll be able to carve out for MCAT studying. What kind of score you're aiming for. So that really depends. Like if you're aiming for a perfect score, there's some, a wider variety of things that you need to have down compared to if you're aiming for a more median score. It really just you can focus more on the high yield things and not worry as much about the nitty gritty things that are less likely to show up. And also, how will you know the content? So it's really important to gauge what your baseline is before you start testing by, usually taking a practice test or self-assessment. And, this might be different for a lot of different people. If you just finished taking biochemistry last week, hopefully a lot of that's still fresh and more accessible to you. But if you've been out of undergrad for 5 years, you might need to dedicate a bit more time to studying.
Synthia, do you have any other thoughts to add to this one?
Yeah, so I guess when it comes to setting a goal score, I've definitely helped students set that because, it varies on like what your end goals are. Like Callie said before, like if you really want to go to a top school, like I think like the top 40 MD schools are a good target for a lot of people because they have good match rates. Like she said, like 520 plus is like a good score, but it's also dependent on like regional preferences. Like maybe you want to stay, like on the West Coast. For me, I really want to stay in California. So rather than like a goal score, I went by a goal percentile. So for me, my goal was above the 90th percentile because California programs are really competitive. So my goal was, and the percentile does change, or the score that correlates with the percentile, it does like vary like minimally. So I think at that time it was like 515. Now it might be like a little bit higher because the MCAT is just getting more competitive. So it just there's a lot of things to consider when picking a goal score. So it's like regional preferences, like program preferences, And also you have to be realistic of your own like abilities and like your own like baseline knowledge, like Callie mentioned.
All right, so now we'll kind of dive into the core topic here and talk about creating a schedule that works for you.
So the first step is finding out everything you need to know about the MCAT, and this PowerPoint can cover a lot of that, but you definitely want to do your due diligence and just like Google everything about the MCAT, like the sections, how long it is, like etc. And then you want to figure out your baseline. So you can do this by taking like a practice test, and then they'll give you your baseline score. But also this helps you identify your strengths and weaknesses. So then you can figure out which sections you need to focus more on. And then you can prioritize your time that way. And then you want to gather your resources. So this can come in the form of like prep courses, like textbooks, could be like workbooks, practice tests. Like I mentioned earlier, you can use UWorld, like Anki. These are resources that a lot of medical students use because we have to study for step 1 and step 2. So a lot of times you'll see medical students using UWorld and Anki. And I think that's starting to like bleed into pre-medical students, and they're now using that to study for the MCAT. And then once you have completed those 3 steps, then you can start to create your schedule. And then this is when you need to really look at like, how much time you're going to need to study. Are you like just dedicating like the summer to study, or are you also taking classes like while studying? So it'll be hard you'll have to like balance like your schedule between like work or like extracurricular activities, research, or like classes when you create your schedule.
Yeah, and I will say there are so many different resources for MCAT studying, and you do not need to use every single one. It's much, instead of trying to have 15 different resources that you're using and juggle all of those, it's better to strategize with a few of them that work well for you, and then really make use of those resources. And I think that the resources that are of the utmost priority are the ones given out by the AA, or given sold to you by the AAMC. Because those are the people who write the test. So I think those are not sufficient to cover studying, but they are very necessary, the practice tests and the question banks. And I think those can be a foundation, and then supplement with things like UWorld, with Anki, with other textbooks, things like that.
I will also say that Inspirit Advantage does have MCAT specific tutors who scored very high on the MCAT, are experts, and are there to help supplement all of those other resources and help find exactly what works well for you, focus on kind of that low-hanging fruit, walk you through the more complex things, kind of tailor things specifically to you. So we're also a great resource. All right.
Yeah. So with building your schedule, the first thing is to block out all of your academic, professional, and extracurricular commitments. Like, use a calendar, Google Calendar, Outlook, or what have you. Like, block everything out, and then be able to visualize exactly how much you have to study for the MCAT left over. And then list your strengths and weaknesses. So this is so individual to every person, but you want to be able to spend more time on your weaknesses, which I suppose kind of makes sense that you really want to be able to, you don't have to study, even though the test is 4 equal parts, you don't need to have your studying be 4 equal parts for all of them. And then to organize the resources and study materials, this is what I was mentioning a little bit earlier, like it'll take a little bit of testing around to see which resources work best for you, but make sure to incorporate these resources into your study schedule.
So this is a very colorful example of a 6-month MCAT study schedule, but you definitely don't need to take 6 months to study for the MCAT. I just did it in 1 summer, so that was like 3 months. But if you are studying for the MCAT during school, then 6 months is appropriate. And that's why here you see that there's like finals and like spring break. So, during this time of the year, obviously this person is in school. But again, like your schedule is individualized. If you benefit more from just like high intensity studying, like towards the end, then that's something that you can schedule out too. And with your schedule, you also want to make sure you incorporate practice tests. Some people do that like every week, they'll take a full-length test. For me, I just focus on taking the full-length test like towards like the last month of studying. But again, it's all individualized and up to your preferences.
Yeah, I took 6 months to study for the MCAT, but I was also a full-time student and involved in a lot of other things. So it was not, I was not studying 30 hours a week by any means. It was much more divided out. And yeah, for me, taking one full-length practice test a week for the weeks leading up to the MCAT, where it was a helpful strategy for me. I wouldn't recommend like doing all your practice tests months beforehand. You want to have them be not the 2 days beforehand, but like overall closer to when you'll actually be taking it.
All right, so we'll talk a little bit about tips to building the best study schedule for you and then actually sticking to it.
So you really want to know your strengths and weaknesses. Is something we've been circling back to a few times here because it's really important to be able to efficiently study. And because if you're already doing really great, let's say in biology, there's going to be, again, diminishing returns with how much better you can do if physics is something that you have so much more room to improve in, for example. And so it's really important to integrate your different study strategies throughout your schedule. Active recall is really, really, really important, whether you're doing practice questions or Anki cards or things like that. That is a really good way to reinforce knowledge as opposed to more passive strategies like underlining or listening to a lecture or passively reading a book. Also learn to adapt to changes in your study schedule. This is really important. If you make a schedule that's so rigid that has no wiggle room, you're not going to be able to stick, like no one can stick to that. Like I remember when I was studying for the boards, I spaced out like 2 or 3 hours every Friday just to catch up on things I had fallen behind on. And that helped make it much more possible to stick to a schedule. And also realistic expectations. So if you're, working a job and extracurriculars and all of that, like you can't study 6 hours every day. So don't make a study schedule that says 6 hours every day. You really need to tailor it to your needs and also make it so you're not going to burn out, because that can be really difficult to rebound from. It's much better to actually be studying for the hours you set aside versus like halfway studying like while stressing out for like 7 hours. That doesn't actually help you that much. And take breaks, like going off of that. Like it's really important to take breaks, both like study day breaks, but also breaks during your study day as well.
I'd like to add a tip of group studying. I thought I was more of the like individual studier, but it became quite isolating. And I had friends who formed study groups when they studied for the MCAT, and they actually had a good time and they enjoyed studying for the MCAT because they had their peers around. And it just keeps the environment like lighter, and it's nice that if your friends can help you with certain questions, and then you can teach topics, and that will reinforce like your own learning. So I recommend trying to form study groups and seeing if that might be more productive for you.
Do either of you have any thoughts on what you wish you would have done differently when studying for the MCAT to be more efficient? I know you just, Synthia mentioned study groups.
Yeah, I wish I did that. I was depressed.
There are a lot of study strategies I incorporated when studying for the boards that I didn't know about or that didn't necessarily utilize when I was studying for the MCAT. One of them is an app to like called Forest, which would like lock me out of my phone for like set it for 45 minutes. Be like, you can't use your phone because otherwise the tree that you just planted will die and your garden will look ugly, is like the system there. But the idea is just like, when you're set to study, like, don't touch your phone, put your computer, like everything on do not disturb, and actually study during that time, and then take a break for 10-15 minutes and relax. And like, that makes it act more, it's much better to study efficiently for 1 hour than like halfway study for 3 hours, and helps prevent burnout.
Also, Pomodoro, that's something that a lot of medical students like to use. And I think I used it when I studied for the MCAT too. But it's I guess it's kind of just like a study method where you study for like 25 minutes and then take like a 5-minute break. I'm not super sure on those numbers. Or you study for like 15 minutes, take a 10-minute break. It just like breaks up the studying, and it's very structured. And then also just like make sure you're incorporating like a healthy diet and like exercise, because that will also prevent you from like burning out.
Yeah, for sure. And like, take time when the hours that you're study, and then the hours that you're not studying, like spend time with your friends and family and rejuvenate yourself, like both because those are important things to do in general to be like a happy human, but then they also will allow you to study with more energy, and like keeping your mindset on what your ultimate long-term goal is, and kind of working backwards from there.
These are some fantastic tips. So we're going to open this up for Q&A now, but while we give some time for questions to come in, I'll ask a couple more of the both of you. How did you break up topics? Would you spend like one day on a specific subject, or would you sprinkle a couple of subjects each day? What was your game plan there?
I can go first. So for me, I knew I had to focus on all the sections except for physics, because I taught physics at UCLA. And I think I would try to do like 2 sections a day. So like I would do like a few passages for the car section. And then I would do a bunch of questions for like either like biology or like psych and soc. So that's typically what I would do.
Yeah, somewhat similar. I was a chemistry tutor, so I spent less time studying chemistry and a lot more time studying physics and other things. And especially, I'd never taken like a sociology class or anything, so I had some more learning to do there. And I went through, at first, like a pass through the textbooks I was using. I went through like each book on its own and doing like the questions alongside that, and then started, once I had laid that foundation, then I started doing more like the question banks and kind of mixing things up a little bit more there. But usually stuck to, over the course of one day, I was more focused on one section per day.
Yeah, I'm sure that changes based on how people learn as well. So it'll vary by person. What surprised both of you the most about studying for the MCAT and taking the MCAT?
I think I was surprised most by how, I don't want to scare you guys, but how difficult it was. I mean, I think for me, I just felt pressured to do very well because, again, like I wanted to stay in California, so I knew I had to get a really good score. So I really pushed myself, and that wasn't the plan. But it was definitely very taxing, which is why like I like cannot recommend enough just to like incorporate, like time with family, time with friends, and like, healthy like diet and exercise to make sure you maintain your well-being.
Yeah, going off of that, and again, not trying to say this to scare you, but I wish someone would have told me this, is that I was someone who during the practice tests and during question banks, I never really worried that horribly much about timing. It all seemed like appropriate based on like read this much in this much time, and it seemed fine. And then on the actual day of the test, I can't speak to whether all of the reading passages were much longer, or if I was just so stressed that everything felt like it was much longer. But I definitely did not have the kind of wiggle room with time on actual test day compared to all of the practice tests. So that really caught me a bit off guard. So I would be very diligent in practicing, making sure that you have extra time at like practice A with the timer. Don't, when you're, especially when you're getting closer to, because a large part of it is, can you think quickly? Can you read quickly? Can you process things quickly? So yeah, really focus on timing.
Is there anything that you see with your Inspirit Advantage clients, or any questions that come up a lot about the MCAT, or I guess what are some of your biggest tips and advice that you have for your current clients who are in the process of taking the MCAT or retaking it?
I don't have any clients who are in the process of taking it. All of my clients are applying to medical school right now, but the most common questions I get asked is like, how important is it, getting into medical school? And I think in that case, there's like a website or program called the MSAR, and that documents like all the averages or medians and like ranges for every school and like the scores that they do accept. So I think that's a really good resource if you want to know like a good target MCAT score, or if you're really interested in a certain like program, then like you can get a good idea of like what scores they typically accept. I hope that answered your question.
It's hard to, going off of that, the MCAT, I think everyone knows it's very important for your application. And it's more important, I think, than your GPA is, because it's something that is very standardized across everyone. I mean, GPA is still incredibly important, but it's hard to overstate how important the MCAT is. But that being said, you can still have a great MCAT, and if you have other big flaws in your application, it's not enough to necessarily outweigh those. So it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece of the puzzle.
And the great thing about the MCAT is you can retake it, whereas your GPA, you're kind of stuck with it for life. You can do a post-bac, but for the most part, you're stuck with your GPA. For the MCAT, you can retake it. I'm not sure if there's like a limit, but I know a lot of my friends like had to retake their MCAT, and that's completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
Callie or Cynthia, someone just asked if we can link that, I think it's the MSAR website, in the chat. Can one of you pop that in when you have a second?
I will, link it.
If I'm correct, I think you do need a subscription for it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth it to be able to assemble, when you get to the point of assembling a school list, especially. Yeah, even if you're just trying to think of like what is a good target score for me, this is the gold tier resource for that.
Anyone else has questions, definitely pop them in the Q&A box. You have experts here who are ready to answer your questions and are a wealth of knowledge. And we just put that website in the chat as well. So definitely check that out. It's a great resource.
So I guess for the chat with the question, do I need to pass all sections of the test, or can I do well in one section? So the MCAT is unlike the boards in that there's not like passing or failing. You're just put on a distribution with everyone. And so all 4 sections matter equally. But in general, if you're trying, because it is so competitive to get into schools, you do really need to do well on all 4 sections. I wouldn't, and there's a limit on how well you can do, right? With the top like getting a perfect score in that. So it can't, like, doing amazing in one section isn't going to really pull you much farther over than section that you do really poorly on. So that's like a really good way to remember to really prioritize your weaknesses.
Yeah, also like a general goal, I'd say, like over 125 for every, or at least 125 per section, like is fine. I think below that, it's like kind of like an orange or like red flag.
For the class of 2025, when do you think they should start studying for the MCAT? So that's a good couple years out. And I'm sure is dependent on when you plan on taking the MCAT. Callie or Cynthia, do either of you have tips on kind of how to schedule that within your kind of undergrad career based on when you're planning on applying to med school and how to kind of plan backwards from that?
Yeah, so nowadays it's becoming more and more common to take gap years, and I took one gap year. Highly recommend it. If you look at the MSAR, you'll notice that the age of matriculants is getting higher and higher, and that's because people are taking more and more gap years. But I still have many peers who got into medical school straight out of college, and if that's the case, then you have to take the MCAT after, I think, like between the summer of your, like after your second year, so that you can apply for medical school like the year after and like the spring. So if you take you have to take the MCAT at some point between beginning the summer after like your second year, and then you can take it, like it's the last time you can take it probably is like, I want to say like winter of that year. Does Callie, does that like, do you agree that how it is?
I went straight through because I didn't know gap years were that important, and got to med school and I was like 75% of people had taken gap years. So definitely gap years can really, really help you if you utilize them well. But anyways, so I took the MCAT my junior year of college, and I took it in March of my junior year because I was taking biochem that fall and wanted to make sure I had taken that course before I took the MCAT. And I took it in March, so I would get my score back in April to be able to apply in May. So I really wanted to, because it takes a month to get your score back, and it's, some people apply without having their scores back yet. But I think it's really, really hard to know what schools to apply for without a score, because you can know where you're scoring with your practice test, but at the end of the day, it's the time you take the MCAT that matters, and it really can be helpful in targeting what schools you're applying to.
And then to add to that, I think like as like a, if you want to be like extra safe, I think it's a good idea to like apply like earlier in like your third year in case you need to retake it. Mm-hmm. I think Callie probably did really well, so she needed to retake it.
And I guess we kind of covered the part of this question that asks about like when you should start studying for it. And I think you can both expand on this, but it varies depending on your schedule. If you're taking 3 months, 6 months to study, and kind of the time you think you'll need for that. But do either of you want to expand on that?
I think assuming that you're a full-time student while studying, I think 6 months is like pretty appropriate. It also, depends on, like I, for example, spring of my junior year took a lighter course load that semester. I mean, it was still a full-time load, but it was fewer courses than I usually took in order to have time to carve out those last few months of spending more time on MCAT studying, but still overall took 6 months.
Yeah, I spent just a whole summer, but I wasn't taking any classes. I was like working part-time, but I think that wasn't that much of a commitment. So I pretty much had like the whole summer to study for the MCAT. So I think either one of those works. And then again, if you plan on taking like gap years, then there's a lot more flexibility of when to take the MCAT.
Another question we have is, where can you find past MCAT questions or more affordable MCAT study materials?
So I found like a lot of free resources through my peers. I mean, at UCLA, there's a lot of pre-meds, and I was lucky to have friends who were also applying the same year as me or studying for the MCAT kind of around the same time as me. So we kind of just like pulled like any free resources we like could find. And then just like shared that collectively. And I feel like now I don't know where you can find any of these free resources because it's been like 5 or 6 years since I've taken the MCAT, and I'm sure it's all very different now. But like Kelly said before, the AAMC is the best resource for practice tests. They have like 7, I think now. Before they only had like 2 when we like took it. So there's definitely a lot more resources out there now. I think one of them is free, but the rest do cost some money, but I don't know how much.
Yeah, so the AMC resources are really, in the grand scheme of things, so completely worth it. It's a tiny drop in the bucket compared to the cost of applying to med school, let alone attending medical school. So I would say that, yeah, there's those ones you just have to buy, but there are other like free resources that you can pull together. Anki is a free, so like people make decks for that. That's completely free. And also, this is something I did too, was that I studied a lot from my undergraduate notes. I was still in school. And so I like had my biochemistry notebook that I studied from. I like reviewed, especially Orgo Lab, like reviewing every lab that we did and those experiments and like why we did that, and like really thinking through all of it was tremendously helpful on the MCAT. Like you've already taken all the classes that cover the content you need to know for it. There's not going to be, like if you've taken all of like the pre-med things, I guess, except for I didn't take Soc, but like as far as like the biology, chemistry things, it's already covered in your undergrad classes. So you can use those resources too. You've already paid for it once. It's not tailored in the MCAT kind of question, passage-based question format. So you also, need to have like that, but in terms of like understanding the content, I think your classes can be really helpful.
Another good resource that I absolutely love, but also like kind of hate, is Reddit. So Reddit is like, it can be such a supportive community, and I definitely found it helpful when I was studying for the MCAT because people link all sorts of resources there, and they make it like free too. There's definitely some like toxic people out there, but I think for the most part, like I loved Reddit. The thread, there's like a lot of threads on like the MCAT and like pre-med. So I feel like if you're looking for like past questions, you can probably ask Reddit.
Yeah. Yeah, Reddit has like a lot of really invaluable resources, but like you mentioned, you have to like be very diligent with how much time you're spending on there and how much you're taking things with a little bit of a grain of salt, because there is a lot of neuroticism that can make you feel very vicariously anxious, even if you don't have a particularly good reason to feel that way. But yes, it's super helpful.
All right. So this isn't quite talking about the MCAT, but as you're both in the med school process and beyond that, do you have any thoughts on where to find physicians shadowing places or things to do in lieu of that for folks who don't have shadowing available in their areas?
Yeah, so you do really, oh, sorry, you can go.
No, go ahead.
You really need clinical exposure, and that can come from a few different things. That can come from working in a clinical space, that can come from clinical volunteering, and that can come from shadowing. And you do need to have shadowing. If you have 0 hours of shadowing, that's definitely going to be a red flag. What I did with shadowing, the hospital where I went to undergrad was very backed up in terms of all the pre-meds who wanted to shadow there, and it was very difficult to get in. So I started looking at just independent clinics in the area, and I had like all my volunteering hours came from like a women's healthcare clinic. That being said, still needed to shadow, and so that's something that it is hard because it's really prioritizes people who have, like, it's much easier if you have physicians in the family to find physicians to shadow, or if you have like networking opportunities like that. But I would say if you can reach out to, in addition to the main hospital, like clinics in the area, just like throw a lot of feelers out there and see where you can get some time shadowing physicians.
I think that's a great idea. I think shadowing is definitely difficult, especially I think during the pandemic. I've had students who struggled finding like hospitals that allow it, and I can definitely see why. I think reaching out, yeah, to like smaller clinics definitely helps with like if you know physicians. But to be fully transparent, I did not have any shadowing hours in the US. I shadowed in Europe through a program called the Atlantis Project. It was only just an excuse to go to Spain for 5 weeks, but also get some shadowing hours in. It was a lot of fun, but it is expensive because it covers like housing and like food and like other things. So the shadowing definitely, you need it, but as I guess, I don't know, a loophole, I did shadowing outside the US, but I recommend it like staying in the US if you can. But for some reason, if you're really struggling, then you can look into the Atlantis Project.
Yeah, and I would say that you don't need like thousands of hours of shadowing. Like you can just, if you can find like a couple of physicians to shadow a bit, like that still is okay. And so I would say you can still, but if you're going to have fewer shadowing hours, you definitely want to have more like either work or volunteering hours to have clinical experience to show that you have an idea of what you're getting into. Like these aren't requirements that they put in arbitrarily. It's important that you know a little bit about what it's like to experience working in healthcare to see if that's something that you can envision yourself doing.
Fantastic. So we have another question about kind of when to start studying for the MCAT. So maybe we break this down just a little bit, kind of more formula based. So if you're planning on applying to med school for, let's say 2025, you want, like, what's the ideal amount of time that you, like, when do you want to take the MCAT? Like how many months before applications open at the end of May do you want to take the MCAT? So before you start filling out applications, is it you want to be taking it 6 months before, a year before? What's the gold range?
So it definitely, depends on like the person, because like, Callie took hers like just a few months before the application cycle. It's definitely an option. I would advise like my students to probably try taking it, like this is just like my opinion too, but I would say like 9 months before I guess, well, if it depends if taking a gap year or not, but okay, let's say, so if you take a gap year after 2025, so I would say if you take the MCAT like a year before you submit your application for medical school, because that's what I did. I studied the summer before I applied for medical school.
So that was right after you graduated college?
No, so it was right before, it was the summer in between my 3rd and 4th year, because I applied for medical school when I graduated, and then that gap year was like the interview, secondaries and the interviews. So I think a year in advance is like good, because like I said, like I had a lot of students like push their test date because they didn't feel like they were ready, or something, just like came up, like family issues, or like I said, like if you need to retake it, then you have like you have more opportunities to retake it and get a score that you want. So that's like what I would generally recommend, like around like a year. But that varies for every person.
Yeah. And I will say that med schools can see every time that you take the MCAT. So ideally you really want to not take it until you're really ready for it. It's not like the SAT or ACT kind of thing where you can like pool it up together different scores and like all of that. Like they can see every score, and there's not infinite opportunities to retake it. So I think trying to really set yourself up to be in a situation where you're ready to take it when it's scheduled, and yeah, having a little bit more flexibility with that to where like if you need to push it back, you can, definitely makes that a bit easier.
One thing to add there is make sure you're aware of when the MCAT is being held. I know there's a few months in the fall where it's not offered, so making sure that you're not banking on taking it in a month where it's not being held is important. All right, well, I think we'll give a last call for questions, so feel free to pop in any last minute questions. Synthia and Callie, thank you so much for being here. You both have a lot of information, and it's been great having you both. Do you have any last minute thoughts, tips, anything that we kind of missed in our initial presentation that you want to add?
This is a very minor point, but when you get to the testing center, you can either bring your own earplugs or ask for earplugs there. Do that, because I didn't for the first section, and like there's like construction going on and it was like super stressful. Use earplugs if you're someone who gets distracted with noises easily. They have them there at the testing centers.
Yeah, I guess like on that note, I always like give my students these tips like right before they take their test, but make sure like you eat a good breakfast, something that won't slow you down, so not too heavy in carbs, and then you can bring your own lunch, and then I feel like I don't know a single person who slept well the night before their big test. So just fair warning, you probably won't sleep well. And this is going to probably repeat when you take the boards. Melatonin, it can help, but it doesn't help you stay asleep. I've had like friends like take stronger things too, and they still couldn't sleep. So fair warning. It's gonna be hard to sleep before the night before your test, but I think if you like wake up super early the day before, like at 5 a.m., like run, like that's what I did for one of my boards tests. I just tried running like for like miles just to tire me out, and then I tried sleeping that night. It kind of worked, but there's just some ways to help you sleep better at night.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend getting used to waking up early. Like get yourself on a rhythm where you're waking up early, because you're gonna need to wake up early on test day. And also I would say, this is the point I forgot to touch on earlier, but when you get closer to the test date, you want to taper. Like this is like a marathon. This is not something you cram for the night before. And so I think like a week or so beforehand, you really want to start tapering and like scheduling in like exercise and like doing literally anything else, because at that point either you know it or you don't. Like there's not going to be like there's so much material, you can't cram it in the night before. You want the day before to be really about relaxation and getting yourself in a good headspace and making like a testing morning playlist that will make you really confident and like things like that. I mean, yeah, you can brush up making sure you don't like forget the amino acids or like but like this, like you really want to have a lot of tapering in that week before.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I just did like flashcards during that last week and like a few practice questions like here and there. And then the day before the test, like I didn't study like at all. I just like relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
And then treat yourself after you take the test. I got sugarfish, I think. It's like sushi.
That's all great advice. Yes, one last question, just with studying and taking practice tests, did either of you mimic the kind of testing schedule when you were taking practice tests in terms of starting when you would start the test in real time, and having like no distraction, like wearing the earplugs and all of that to make sure you were ready for that environment? Or did you kind of go in blind there?
Yep, did all the mimicking, and like I was a little over the top and being like, okay, I can't drink water or coffee while I'm actually doing the questions because I won't be able to have any liquids while in the testing center, so I can like learn how to ration the coffee I'm drinking throughout this. And like that might be a bit much, but it made me feel a little bit more like at ease or prepared in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I tried my best to mimic the test conditions. I definitely didn't wake up, I think, that early, but just still like early enough in the morning. And then I would like eat what I would like think I would eat for breakfast on like the day of the test. So I think but I only did not for I didn't do that for all my test simulations. I think I only did that for like the last like 3 full-length tests that I took, just to like really prepare me for the real deal.
Mm-hmm. And like another thing I think can be, you can do with this information what you want. I found it helpful for the boards with like in your study schedule, having like one tab in your schedule and have like another sheet be like graphing your progress, like what are the scores you're getting on practice tests. And like I think it can be really in some ways helpful to see like, am I improving, am I not, like do I need to like reevaluate what I'm doing, or am I making good progress? Like having that visual representation can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but I think overall is like kind of being honest with yourself with how your studying is going.
And on that note about like scores, so I'm not sure what the practice tests are like now, but I want to say like all the practice ones that aren't AAMC are much harder than the actual tests. They're much harder than the AAMC practice tests. So I typically advise students to do those practice tests first, like the ones that aren't AAMC, and then save the AAMC ones for last, because those are going to be the most accurate. And they're also going to be easier. So definitely it's better for your mental health if you do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. And thank you everyone who attended. We'll be sending out an email in the next couple of days that has a recording of this webinar for you to refer back to. We also have some webinars on our website that dive more into the application process, interviewing, and we have more coming up as well. So feel free to go register for those, watch old ones, schedule a consultation if you want to talk to some of our team to kind of understand our services and how we can help you through this process as well. Callie and Cynthia, thank you so much for being here and all of your advice. And I hope everyone has a really fantastic afternoon and rest of your weekends.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.